All right. Hi, everybody. I suppose we can start. Can I kindly ask if that you just help me with confirmation on whether you can hear me just fine. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
That's all.
Yes, sir.
Ah,
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much. I suppose we can start. I had to kill the other instance of Google Meet. So a couple of announcements. So first, right, I wanted to, there's this. I would apologize that we are having this as a virtual session. I really wanted this to be an in-person session, but there's this. There's a funder. These recurring funder meetings that we have. So it's I think the last Wednesday. It's always the last. Is it the last Wednesday of every month or something like that? So we have it today, and we're gonna have it right after this class. So it's just going to be convenient for us to have a virtual interaction. And because we've already gotten money from our funders, I don't have the luxury of running away from such meetings. I have got to attend those meetings. So that's the first part. And then the first part, the other announcement really is, it turns out that between I'm facilitating. I think I mentioned this, but I'm helping facilitate an AI skills building workshop, and I just realized I didn't pencil this in because I'm like the organizer. I'm usually used to doing these things. It's usually a lot easier when somebody else does this on your behalf or something. So I'm going to be facilitating this event, and it's an all-day event. Sadly, it will be taking place off campus, somewhere in Chongwe or something, right? And so I'm not really sure if I'm going to be available. I'm not really sure if I'm going to be available on on. I'll have to confirm on Monday. Unfortunately, my confirmation will be done rather late, right? So I'll probably confirm somewhere around 16. The beauty about that part of the city is when I'm coming back from that side, coming back to Osaka, it turns out that I'll be going against the traffic, so I won't really have to worry about the traffic. That's the thing. So if I leave that place maybe around 16, I'll try as much as possible to leave around 16, maybe 16:30, somewhere there, so that I come to campus in good time for our class. But in the event that I anticipate that I'm not going to make it on time, what I will do is I will insist that we have class when I'm still in Chongwe, right? So it'll be a virtual class. It's tentative here. That's the first thing. And then on Tuesday again, I am not really sure because we start these sessions rather early. I know it says 9 here, but it's likely that we're going to be starting around 8 because we have to process people that are going to be attending this event, right? So again, I will have to confirm. I will confirm on Sunday, on Monday rather, on whether we shall have our 7 o'clock class. I think we should be able to have this because what I can do is there are other colleagues that are helping facilitate this event, right? So there are colleagues from Copperbelt University and Zikas University and stuff. So I think I want us to plan to have this event. So we shall have this class, right? Tentatively. However, if I anticipate on Monday that it will not be possible because I only know on Monday, then what I'll insist is we push this to the evening as well. Certainly, we will not have our class on Wednesday on the 27th because I'll be at the event. We won't have our class at 11. I would like to, this is me proposing to you that we move this class to, and this is tentative, but for planning purposes, this is for me. I'm going to already move this to 18 hours, I know for certain I'll be available by 18 hours. I'll certainly be tired, but I'll be available at 18 hours. Okay. So those are the announcements here. Now, the about the potential changes in the lecture slots or something like that. The other announcement is that, you know, we've had we have the slots that we've missed here, right? So in the interest of making sure that we play catch up here, I am proposing that we have class on Saturday. Yeah. I'm proposing that we have class on Saturday at 12, right? So I'm gonna use 12 work, I guess. At 12, so just take note there. So 12, and then also, you know, we there are a couple of slots that we've missed, right? And I'm sitting here and I'm thinking, I was going to suggest Sunday, but because Sunday, I mean, this is when our event starts. It's one of those weird events where it has got to start on Sunday, right? The workshop itself. So I'm not available on Sunday. But I'm sitting here and I'm wondering if, not wondering actually, this is for you to kind of process as a group. I will ask that you have the two course reps give me feedback. I want to propose another class day after tomorrow, which is Friday. Now, day after tomorrow, I'm available between, I have a class at 12, but I'm available at 13. Wait a minute. 13, 14. I think there's somebody else who, when was that? There's somebody who was supposed to send me, what is happening here? There's somebody who sent me a request, right? For a meeting. I know it's on Friday. I just need to confirm when this is here. September. What is this? Okay. That's okay. It's September. I thought it was this Friday, actually. Wow. Okay. So on Friday, I'm proposing a makeup class on Friday. I have time between 13 hours and 16 hours. So I expect an email from the two course reps on when we are going to have a class on Friday. So we have two makeup classes on Friday and on Saturday. That's it. That's the other announcement here. Now, the other thing is that, if you remember, I'd hinted at the fact that we were going to have the presentations this week. It's not going to happen, right? And because I'm busy next week as well, I won't be available in person. Please take note of the fact that these presentations, they're happening, right? They're happening they're happening week after next, between. So in other words, plan for these presentations in the week of the 1st. And just to put it bluntly here, the presentations are going to happen we're going to start at 17 hours on Monday. You know, in fact, what I'm also planning to do is maybe try and see if I can reach out to Mr. Mwinga here and the Assistant Dean to see if we can gain access to the Michael Kelly Lecture Theatre between 16 hours and possibly 18, 19 hours, somewhere there. In the event we don't, the presentations are certainly starting, or rather, we're going to do them on Monday itself. Either we're starting at 16 or at 17, right, as part of the lecture slot or something. So take note, we're doing this in the week of the 1st, this week after next. All right. Now that we have that out of the way, I think we can continue, right, our discussion of research methods. You know, quite an interesting discussion, in my opinion, especially that a lot of things that we started discussing early on in the process are beginning to make sense now. And when we had class yesterday in the morning, I deliberately drew your attention to the case of the disappearing spoon, right? And also I deliberately drew your attention to the prep study that was conducted at the UNZA. And all of these instances, right? You notice that there's explicit mention of these key methodological aspects that we've been discussing. 346 students participated in this cross-sectional study, at UNZA between March and June 2021. A longitudinal cohort study was conducted, right? In the case of the disappearing spoon or something like that. Anyways, so we've done quite a bit by way of methodology, and our guide, really, ladies and gentlemen, has been this so-called research onion, right? Where we're peeling off the layers of the onion as they relate to the different methodological aspects, right? So we had a discussion of so-called research paradigms, or research philosophies, and sort of ways of knowing, right? If you remember, and then at some point we started. We had a discussion of methodological choices, right? Quantitative, qualitative, mixed methods designs and stuff. And then recently we started our discussion of so-called strategies, right? Research strategies. So it's notion that you can come up with different research strategies as they relate to specific designs, really, right? You can leverage an experiment, a survey, or a case study or something, ethnography. It turns out that there's quite a bit. There's a lot of strategies that you can employ, but we just focused on the more common types, right? So some of these are more advanced for 2034 here, right? So no need for us to discuss theory generation using grounded theory. Fun fact, I use grounded theory for my master's degree, right? I was generating theory here. If that makes sense here. Yeah. So there was that. And then yeah, so we had a discussion of research strategies, right? Now, it turns out that all of these things are somewhat connected, right? If you remember, when discussing strategies, for instance, there was a reference to the methodological choices, is it? If you remember. And also at some point during our discussion of these methodological choices, we're making reference to the research philosophy, right? There's got to be a connection. If that kind of makes sense here. Anyway, so we discussed these different strategies, and during our discussion of the strategies, there was mention of the fact that it was a primer to our subsequent discussion where we're going to be looking at so-called measurement instruments, right? So the specific things that you use to collect data. In other words, what we're saying is that, or what we're hinting at was the fact that the strategies tend to dictate specific instruments that you're going to be using. You're going to be using a questionnaire. Are you going to be using an interview guide, right? Are you going to be leveraging observations and all those things, right? So quite a bit of stuff that we've discussed so far. Just going to prop up the volume here. So we did that, right? It's quite fun, really. All the while, by the way, I was giving you examples as well, if you remember. Trying as much as possible. Yeah, sometimes, giving this talk, forgetting that you're interacting with individuals who are actually being introduced to research for the first time, right? So I've tried as much as possible to make radical changes. I'm still making changes. In fact, I was making changes to the presentation slide deck today. So the thing that has been uploaded on the Moodle is stale. I shall update it after class. Anyways, and then there was mention of the time horizon, right? In essence, we're trying to understand what it means when we're reading a paper and they say we conducted a longitudinal study, or we conducted a cross-sectional study, right? So that is tied to what we introduced as, or what's referred to as the time horizon in the research onion, right? The period within which you're collecting data. It could be a snapshot, or it could be repeated measures using the same samples, And the key thing here, I know we haven't gotten to a stage where we're discussing, sampling techniques and sample sizes and stuff here, but a sample is not necessarily a human being, is it? It's not a group of human beings. A sample could be anything. It could be a sample of mice, right? It could be a sample of spoons, as was the case in the paper, the case for the disappearing spoon, no pun intended here. Anyway, so we had a discussion of the time horizon. And I tried again as much as possible to provide you with examples so that it's a lot easier for you to understand these things. Now, before we start our discussion of measurement instruments, I thought we'd just quickly go through some important aspect that that we haven't really or we skipped, right? Important aspect that we skipped, which is a typical approach that you take to theory development, if it's applicable. We didn't really need to discuss this as part of 2034, but if this thing is a part of the research onion, I didn't want to leave people hanging here wondering why we didn't discuss this, right? So if you remember our discussion of broad research approaches here, quantitative, qualitative, and mixed methods approaches here, it turns out that by looking at those different aspects, we can actually use our research onion model here to be more precise, right? It turns out that the model obviously gives us like specific labels for different layers of the design itself, and it turns out that this approach to theory development really gives you a lens within which you can identify an appropriate logical path to take, right? A logical path as it relates to finding truth, in other words. Right? Because the whole essence of research is we're seeking truth, is it? We want to ascertain what is true, right? Is it true that Lighton, is Lighton effective, right? So we want to ascertain if Lighton is effective at teaching 2034, if you will. Okay. Now, it turns out that there are two main approaches here, typically, right? Deductive and inductive reasoning. And the methodological choice is often linked to the approach to theory development. So if you find yourself leveraging, if you come up with if you're going to conduct a quantitative study, it's likely that you're going to use deductive reasoning, in other words, right? So there's a link here, in other words, Now, in terms of the definition of what these two things are here, with deductive reasoning, you're taking a top-down approach here, right? And typically, what this involves is a sort of situation where you have a pre-existing theory, and the goal here is to test that theory. You probably notice that what most people do, especially in manuscripts, right, is they'll tell you something like, we used, and I'm going to find something we were looking at not too long ago, we used the technology adoption model, right, as a theoretical lens for us to understand or to guide the overall research process. This is what this guy did here. Yeah, in terms of the theoretical framework, we used term 2 or something, or UTOUT or something like that, right? These obviously tell signs that this person is testing a theory, is it? Because he's picking something that already exists and using it to guide the research, right? So he's taking a top-down approach, deductive reasoning, and typically when you're leveraging deductive reasoning here, you're moving from something that is general, because the theory is generalized, is it? A theory can be applied to different sort of problems, if you will. I can use term to understand adoption of AI by students at UNZA. I can also use term to understand adoption of, I'm trying to think here, the adoption of the government portal, something like that, right? Yeah, software platform that we use to, pay for road tax and all those things. Anyway, and the purpose really typically when you're leveraging deductive reasoning is you're trying to you'll be working towards either confirming or rejecting a hypothesis or a set of hypotheses, if you will, right? And we see here that if we're to link this to different methodological choices here, typically this sort of approach is associated with quantitative studies, right, or quantitative research. Again, what you're doing in this particular instance is you start with a theory, come up with a hypothesis or something, and then you collect your numeric data, right, because you're leveraging quantitative research here. And if you remember, quantitative studies are often associated with, surveys or experiments or something like that, right? And you test. Yeah. I have a simple example here, right? Somewhat related. Some of these examples I've already introduced to you here. To do with computing here. Say, would start with a theory, right? To say, well, we're going to leverage the technology acceptance model term, for instance, so that it provides us with a framework for how students are able to accept new technologies like AI tools like ChatGPT, for instance. Yeah. And what we'll do is, of course, I mean, we've left out the gory details of you identifying specific objectives and research questions here, but would formulate an example hypothesis like students' intention to use ChatGPT, for instance, is determined by their perceived usefulness. So you find yourself using ChatGPT because you think it's useful, right? So if we put a hypothesis, and then we would choose an appropriate quantitative method to use, right? So maybe we say we want to collect this data using a questionnaire. And what we'll be collecting is numeric data for the most part, okay, comprising of items that will enable us measure perceived usefulness. And then what we do is we analyze the data to in essence, to test the hypothesis, right? Afterwards, we'll be able to draw conclusions so that we are certain if the results confirm, right, or fail to confirm the theory's prediction in this specific context. So again, it's deductive reasoning, right? Top-down approach. Start with the theory and narrowing it down to the specific. On the other hand, inductive reasoning takes a bottom-up approach. You typically use this when you're looking at generating theory, right? So you conduct a series of studies with the main goal of trying to come up with something that can be generalized so that other people can apply it or something like that. Now, this approach to theory development would typically involve building a new theory, like I said. And in terms of the logical reasoning, you're moving from something that is specific, tied to whatever research you'll be conducting. So you conduct observations, and then using that, you generate a theory. And typically, inductive reasoning is there because it enables you to generate new theories, ways of explaining the world around you, right? So it could be theories or models, really. If that model doesn't exist, there are certain problems where may not really have a theory in existence, and you know full well that other people are going to benefit from a newly introduced theory or something, right? So we say we're going to take a grounded theory approach to generate a new theory, right? You'll be using inductive reasoning, and classically, really, we notice here that the key methodological choices here would be qualitative in nature, right? Again, what we are doing here is we start by collecting data, we analyze the data, and we use the results of the analysis to build a theory from the ground up. You're building a new theory. So pretty straightforward. Here, this is an example, right? If we wanted to, let's say, we have a research question where we want to find out, how librarians experience and cope with information overload, right? In the age when, there's so much going on, Twitter or X, Facebook, and Google Scholar and all those things, right? So how do I cope? So what we'll do is we'll choose the appropriate method, right? This appropriate qualitative method. Maybe we'll say we're going to conduct in-depth interviews, for instance, or conduct observations, right? Non-participant observations or something like that. Afterwards, once we do this, we analyze the data and we look for patterns. We analyze the interview transcripts, for instance, and we would be looking for patterns as they relate to common themes, right? So maybe we'll identify these common themes as comprising constant notifications. When I'm in this digital age, I'm overwhelmed with things like messages coming through about there's a lecture, there's an email, there's a WhatsApp notification, and all those things, right? So it's like themes that you identify. Typically, by the way, we'll have a discussion of how you analyze interview data, but these themes will manifest themselves from these interactions that you'd have with the interviewees, right? Other themes, example themes would be pressure to be an expert, right? Or developing filtering strategies, right? How to make sense out of what is useful and what is not useful. So like if you got WhatsApp notifications, right? Should I read all of the things that are coming to my WhatsApp or something, right? Should I read everything? Is there a way I can filter what is relevant and what is not relevant, right? Just ignore some of the things, I guess. I don't know. Anyway, so once you look for patterns, you then, in step number 4, you develop your theory or something from these themes. You know, thematic analysis is one of those common ways of qualitative data, by the way. You know, I'll ask the person who, I don't know who has a microphone on here, Mrs. Stali. I'm going to help you mute. Okay, so I mean, to sum it up, you know, we see here that if we look at there are certain differences here when we look at different features associated with ways of reasoning. You know, in terms of relation to theory, with deductive reasoning, you are working with existing theories, and there are a ton of theories, right? A lot of theories. In the recent past, I've worked with students who've used theories like diffusion of innovation theory, right? You know, you're trying to understand how technology diffuses into a particular domain or environment or something. I believe this is what Matilda Mchinga from Levi Mwanawasa Medical University, she's a librarian there. I think this is what she used or something, you know? Or the most common one that my students that develop software use is technology adoption model, for instance. These are all theories, right? That will help explain the results you've collected. So you'll be taking a deductive reasoning approach if you're looking at testing this sort of theory. See how the theory fits or how your data fits into the broader confines of the theory. In most instances, you use a theory to explain your findings, to help guide the research itself. But we see that with inductive reasoning, what you're doing is there's no theory in existence, but you are building a new theory. Anyways, in terms of logical flow, we see that with deductive reasoning, we are moving from something that is more general, a theory that explains how things are, to something that is specific to the study that you're conducting. However, with inductive reasoning, it's the opposite, is it? You start off with the research, and using the research, you come up with a generalization, a theory that other people, other researchers can use, or a theory that you can apply subsequently, right, in other studies, something like that. If you look at methodological choices, typically with deductive reasoning, you are leveraging quantitative approaches, whereas with inductive reasoning, it's qualitative approaches, right? The strategies, right, supposed to be common here. I need to fix this. Typically, you use surveys and experiments for deductive reasoning. This makes sense because your methodological choice is quantitative, whereas with inductive reasoning, it's typically things like case studies, observations, ethnography. Pretty straightforward here. Now, you know, the most I've been really looking forward to this, because once we are done with this discussion, you should be able to start working towards the next part of the experiment, where you design your instruments and you start collecting data. After tomorrow, on Friday, I shall make available an assessment that will require that you go out there now to go and collect the data. Okay, so I want to be discussing the last layer, ladies and gentlemen, of the of Sanders et al.'s research onion, and we'll be looking at procedures and techniques. Right, so you're looking at this white circle here, where you have access, ethics, sample selection, data collection, and analysis. We've looked at all of these different outer layers, so it's the final layer we're looking at here. Right now, our discussion, incidentally, by the way, you notice that there's some of the things that we've already discussed here. like access to participants to a certain extent, and also ethics. We've already discussed these things. I was tempted for us to start with sample selection, but I figured it would make sense if we started with our discussion of measurement instruments, and then afterwards we'll look at sampling, right? Or sample selection, really. And that's it. At the later stage in the last lecture series, we'll look at how we analyze data, right? Quantitative data and qualitative data and all those things. But anyways, so on with it. We're going to start our discussion with so-called measurement instruments, right? It sounds fancy here, and I'm sure when I first uttered the word measurement instrument, if you remember, I think in the very second lecture after administrivia, I use this word a lot. Measurement instrument, measurement. It sounds fancy here, but really what we're referring to by measurement instrument, the word measurement instrument is any tool or method used to collect data from participants so that you measure variables of interest. It's a tool or method to collect data. If you think about it here, right, you begin to realize that, a questionnaire is a measurement instrument because we use questionnaires to collect responses from human participants, right? An interview guide is a measurement instrument because we use it to collect in-depth qualitative data. You're sitting there and you're interviewing Lighton, right? Because you're trying to understand to what extent his students are abusing ChatGPT or something. So what you typically do is when you're interviewing him, maybe you ask for permission if you can record the session. You record the session. Afterwards, you transcribe the session, and then you're going to be analyzing the text, is it? Right. So the interview itself is typically guided by a set of questions, predefined questions. Right? You say, first of all, you're going to ask Lighton, how many courses do you teach at UNZA? What type of courses are these or something? Do you have a sense of how your students use ChatGPT? These questions that you ask would be predefined, right? Beforehand, before you interview Lighton. You write them down somewhere. You write them down in what we call an interview guide, something similar to what this very interesting individual did here in their work. He's a PhD student, right? You create an interview guide like this. Semi-structured, I suppose, semi-structured interview, right? You have an interview guide here. Time required, and then you have like these questions here that you're going to be asking participant, interviewees, right? Anyways, so all of these are measurement instruments. And it turns out really that there is a broad spectrum of measurement instruments. You can collect, in other words, the ways of collecting data, methods of collecting data, or tools that you use to collect data are numerous. You can do it in a structured manner, right? Using a questionnaire. You can use interviews. You can observe people. I don't know if you remember when you were in primary school, right? They'll just tell you, there's this person from the Ministry of Education who's come to observe this class or something. He's sitting at the back. He or she was collecting data, right? Using observations. They're sitting there at the back and just writing down things. That's a method, right, of collecting data. And what you'd be interested in that instance is behavior of students, for instance, or the lecturer or the teacher. They actually know how to teach and all those things. But there are other ways of collecting data. Like, for instance, you can bunch or lump people together into a group and see exactly what's going to, incidentally, see what's going to happen with them, right? To collect data from them as a group. Incidentally, this thing I was talking to you guys about, I must say this. I just told you that there's this event that is happening in Chongo, this skills building workshop. It's a workshop, right? We're actually going to be collecting I know I'm going to be collecting data there. We're training people here, but we're going to be collecting data, right? As it relates to adoption of artificial intelligence in industry in Zambia. So we'll have people in one group coming in from ZRA, from Parliament. These are technical people, right? People that work in IT. Zambia Meteorological Agency and stuff. So different ways of collecting data. You can conduct workshops. right? What I was describing is a workshop. So what we have is a workshop. A focus group is like it's similar to an interview, but instead of just interviewing an individual, interview a group of individuals. So I want to find out the adoption of AI. It's say I want to interview lecturers in all the 13 schools. But guess what? Each school has a ton of departments. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select at least one lecturer from each of the different departments within each of the 13 schools and conduct focus group discussions. I'm going to conduct focus group discussions with lecturers from the School of Education. I'll conduct also focus group discussions with lecturers from the School of Engineering, lecturers from the School of Nursing Sciences, lecturers from the School of Public Health, So focus group discussions. So you bring them together and you're having a discussion like that. So a wonderful way of collecting data. Anyways, different sort of instruments, right? Again, these measurement instruments are essentially tools and or methods that we use to collect data. Incidentally, these tools and or methods are directly associated with these other things that we've been discussing. Strategies, methodological choices, approaches to theory development, the theoretical or the paradigm, the philosophy or the paradigm associated with your work. All of these things are connected. Anyways, now, before we start diving deep into a discussion of these common types of instruments, and then I want to focus on in 2034 here is we'll discuss at length how we create questionnaires. Okay, we spend a lot of time, most of you are doing this. We shall also spend a lot of time discussing interviews. I don't think we should focus a lot on observation. We want to talk about this as well. But we're going to focus our attention on surveys and interviews, because during our discussion of data analysis, we shall again focus our attention on how we analyze data collected using questionnaires and also data collected using interviews. Anyways, before we start though, our discussion of these different types of measurement instruments, now you can sound fancy with your colleagues. You go out there, say, we're discussing measurement instruments in research methods, I don't know why people complicate these things here. But, before we discuss measurement instruments, it's important, right, for us to appreciate the broad spectrum of different types of data that we collect. Because, you see, if we're saying the measurement instruments are tools and methods used to collect data, the obvious question that we must ask ourselves is, what are the different types of data that we collect, right? And really, if you canvass the literature, you begin to notice that there are people, smart people, a long time ago that categorize the different sort of data here. And by the way, when you're looking at data here, it's best viewed from the perspective of attributes, is it? When I'm collecting data about you, if you think about it, if I wanted to collect data about you, I guess, it turns out that there's different aspects about you, right? You're a student. There are different aspects about students, right? That will enable me to differentiate amongst the different students enrolled in 2034. So I'll say, I'm going to capture their student ID. I'm going to capture their student names, right? I'm going to capture their last name. Last name. I'm going to capture their first name. I want to capture their date of birth. I shall capture their gender. I will capture their minor program. And if you notice this, right? Simply 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Simply 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10. Simply using one of these things here is not going to properly describe you in most instances, right? So I would have to use a combination of these things here. For me to explain, to describe, who is here now? Well, for me to describe Abel Banda, for instance, it wouldn't be enough for me to just specify his ID, right? Relative to 2034. I'll be able to comprehensively describe him by by including details of his ID, last name, first name, date of birth, gender, and his minor. In fact, even his major program, right? Because we have people that that are enrolled in different programs here, and the minor. These things here, student ID, last name, first name, date of birth, gender, major, minor, are what are called data attributes, right? Or data types, okay? And they come in various shapes and forms here. So what we're saying here is research data that we collect, right? Remember, our goal here with measurement instruments is we use them to collect data from participants. But the data that we collect comprises of different instances of observations or different records. So if I'm collecting data about you, there'll be like 76 data points, right? You are called an instance or an observation. Okay? And each instance of observation is associated with each instance. Each of these instances is associated with different attributes. Okay? The attributes are the things that facilitate measurement of an observation. So when I'm collecting data about you, I will collect your ID, student ID, last name, date of birth, gender, major, minor, first name, or something like that. Okay? And collectively, these attributes are what are going to help us describe this observation, right? Associated with the data we are collecting. Now, it turns out that these data attributes will typically be categorical or continuous in nature. Categorical or continuous. If you are sitting there and you are wondering, well, but why are we even having this discussion here? Well, when you find yourself conducting inferential statistics, for instance, the type of data attribute that you are using becomes important. It influences the specific type of statistical test you're going to perform or conduct. The type of attribute is going to dictate how you're going to design your questionnaire. If I'm collecting data about gender, ladies and gentlemen, if I'm collecting data about gender, right? Forms.google.com. If I'm collecting information about gender, I'm going to have to create a form in such a way that the options I'm giving to people are going to be restricted, is it? They have got to be restricted. So I'll come here and I'll say gender. A gender has got to be a radio button, right? Because in Zambia, you can't be both, right? In fact, there's two options here. It's either you are, instead of starting with male, list people say, why did you start with male? Is it because you're male or something? It's either you're male or female in Zambia, right? In Zambia. I don't know about these other places here. Male or female. It's crazy what happens here, right? So you would, and this tool knows, even as prefer not to say, I'm going to close this here, right? So it's either male or female, right? However, there are instances where, well, I guess it's like either male or female or something, but there are instances where what you are capturing may not necessarily include two options only, right? It could be multiple options or something like that, right? So you could have something like, well, what food? Okay, which courses do you like the most or something, right? In this particular case, you know that the options that somebody is going to have to specify here are going to be multiple, right? So you'd be using something like check boxes. It's say, well, LIS 2034. Okay. ICT 2010 or something. RAM 2010 or something like that. Right? So that when this thing is distributed, somebody is going to be able to choose multiple options here. But in here, you can only choose one option, right? Anyways, so it turns out that these data attributes can either be categorical or continuous. As the name suggests, categorical attributes are will indicate categories of things, is it? It's a category, a restricted set of things, in other words, right? And typically categorical attributes are qualitative somehow, right? Now categorical attributes come in different subcategories. We have so-called nominal attributes, which will represent more than two categories that cannot be ordered. That's one thing. Ordinal attribute will represent two or more categories that can be ordered. Dichotomous attributes are a subset of nominal attributes. It's exactly two categories that cannot be ordered. Here's the thing. Whether you are male or female is inconsequential here, right? There's nothing like male is better than female and stuff like that. Well, it could be, it was the case here 500 years ago, I guess, or 100 years ago or something. But this is, there's no order, right? Or doesn't matter whether you are pursuing the bachelor of ICTs with education, or the B.ICTs with education, or if you're pursuing your Bachelor of Arts in Records Management or something. It doesn't matter, right? There's no order here. In fact, even your Bachelor of Arts in Library and Information Science, it doesn't matter, right? There's no order. However, if I was to ask you right now, right, to what extent do you think Lighton, on a scale of 1 to 5, to what extent do you agree with this statement? Lighton is effective at teaching 2034. On a scale of 1 to 5 means something like strongly disagree, neutral, agree, strongly agree. Now, these things here can be tied to something like 1, this is 2, this is 3, this is 4, because it's a 5-point scale, right? And this is 5. There is a natural order here. 5, strongly agree, is greater than strongly disagree. This is what we mean here, right? This is an ordinal attribute. These are categorical attributes. These specifically are nominal attributes. This is dichotomous attribute. Gender would be, not, these are values, by the way, but in this particular case, this would be, gender would be a categorical attribute. Program, major will be a categorical attribute, right? Effectiveness, score will be an ordinal attribute. All of these 3 different types of attributes are what we are calling categorical attributes, right? We also have so-called continuous attributes. Now, the idea behind continuous attributes here is simple. You are looking at numeric values, in other words. But there's a catch here, right? You see, you sit there and you realize that, wait a minute, Lighton, if you're saying we are capturing these values here, strongly disagree, agree, and neutral, these are numeric attributes, is it? They are, but they're categorical in nature. So we're differentiating these things. These are discrete. We're differentiating these things from something that is continuous, right? Something that has a broad range of values within a certain scale. Like your score, right? Score, continuous assessment score. A continuous assessment score can range from 0 to 100. In between 0 and 100, you can have someone get 0.15%, somebody get 99.99%, somebody get 50.0%, 50%, 50.1, 50.2, 50.15, 50.156%. So it's continuous, right? Like that. So we're making a distinction between categorical attributes and continuous attributes. Now, you know, when you're discussing continuous attributes, it's important to make a distinction between interval attributes and ratio attributes. Again, these things will dictate statistical tests to be performed here. And interval attributes, right, will measure continuous over a range of values. A ratio attribute is similar to an interval attribute, but 0 has no significance, right? And usually, when you're discussing this with students, they typically have they'll typically struggle here to understand what we mean. And what I normally do is I normally like making an example of what do you call this? Of examples of specific attributes that would be racial attributes or something, right? Where it says 0 has 0, if you're looking at grades, has meaning, right? It's an absence of the value. But that's not the case for temperature, right? If you say temperature is 0 degrees, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's an absence of something, is it? If that makes sense. That's what we mean by racial attribute. The interesting thing is that in most instances, if you look at the broad spectrum of data attributes that you'll be working with, generally you tend to work with interval attributes in terms of specific types here of continuous attributes. You find yourself working with interval attributes. Now, here's the thing. If you're looking at specific examples, subsequent slides here are just showcasing examples of these things. Interval attributes, your CS score. This is not a racial attribute. I do apologize. This is an error. I should probably replace this. Dichotomous attributes, exactly two values, male or female, rich or poor, yes or no. Do you like LIS 2034? If I had a questionnaire and I created an item called, do you like, it's a question, right? In the questionnaire, do you like LIS 2034? It's a yes or no answer. Dichotomous attribute, right? If you look at the grade, a specific grade, A plus A, B plus B, C plus C, D plus D, not examined. That's a classic example of a nominal attribute, is it? More than 2, sorry, that's an ordinal attribute, right? Because the order matters. A plus is better than D plus or D. And then you have your nominal attributes and stuff. Listen, it turns out that now that we know the type of data attributes that we'll be using to collect this information from the observations, it becomes important for us to appreciate these different types of specific instruments that we can use to collect data. And so what we are going to do the next time we have class is we're going to start our discussion of how we create questionnaires and interviews and the observation checklists and all those things, right? We'll start off with questionnaires. I'm going to pause here and ask if there are any questions. I'm looking at the time. I'm transitioning to a different meeting, but I think I can pause here and ask if there are questions. Okay, that's fine. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. I shall see you when you see me, I suppose. Looks like there are no questions. Can you hear me, by the way?
Yes, we can.
Yes, sir, we can.
Okay, all right. Okay, great, thanks. Okay, thank you very much then. I will see you when you see me, which is we have class I think we said day after tomorrow and also Saturday. So we'll be fine here. Bye for now.
Bye.